In his sessions with psychiatrist Dr. Dietz, he revealed that some of his clients wanted his victims to suffer before they died. Of course, Kuklinski obliged, creating the kind of death nightmares are made of.
Not just nightmares, but also financially successful pieces of entertainment, like this HBO special.
Often capturing the torture on film.
Hey, that's a good idea. You're making the cops' job easier. Torture and murder somebody in the first degree, and film it. Nothing can go wrong there. Well, maybe you just tortured somebody once and filmed it. Wait, did she say he often filmed himself torturing victims? Seems like an unnecessary risk. Our criminal mastermind here could have just tortured his victim in front of his sadistic boss, but I guess his boss needed a tape as a kind of revenge memory for him to whack off to on occasion. And Kuklinski, being a trusting guy, didn't have to worry about any of the homes of these sick fucks getting raided someday by the cops, one of his family members finding it, blabbering away, and implementing Rich in another murder. Leaving evidence around seems stupid, but it's not like serial killers don't take trophies, or people don't do stupid things all the time when they murder. It's just kind of trusting leaving all these tapes with these different bosses. Maybe he burned them later on. But anyway, so what was this diabolical nightmare that Richard did?
I used to have a thing where I would take somebody into a cabin or cave, whatever you want to call it, and I would tie them up or tape them, their hands and their feet together, and then I would leave them there.
Jesus fucking Christ, that would suck. Especially if I have to take a leak. I know HBO shows you a cave that looks like it's straight out of Evil Dead, if one of those movies had had a cave in it, and that's to suggest that that's the cave he took his victims to. But like a lot of images it shows in these HBO specials, they aren't linked to anything Richard actually did, and are just there to create atmosphere. That's why it's also in black and white, because it looks scarier. Fortunately, though, Richard identified the caves he'd torture and film his victims in the book Iceman by Philip Carlo. He interviewed him in prison. Richard identifies these caves as Bucks County, Pennsylvania caves. They're surrounded by forests. Now, this is diabolical because although the very large caves are rare, very rare, the average small cave might be the size of a room or a basement, and it's surrounded by forest. So this sinister Richard could be putting me in there for a few days. I'm just stuck having to wait to get out. And even if I get out, you put me in one, I'm not going to know where to go. Even if I somehow get free, I'm going to be wandering in the forest all night. Might as well just stay there. So if I were the victim, that means this mean motherfucker is going to leave me in the dark all night, tied up, till some splunker finds me. It's got to be cold.
And I leave a camera on.
Plus, he's taping it, so his Cobra Commander boss can maniacally giggle at me, watching it on film. That's embarrassing. Well, at least he's not going to do anything worse than that. Oh, fuck. No, he has more to tell us. Hope it's not anything too diabolical.
And, rats used to eat them.
Oh God, no. Jesus, how could you, Rich? Not the man-eating piranha cave rats. They almost took out Rambo once.
It used to kill these people and start nibbling away at them.
Iceman, you also say they were quickly stripped down to the bone, most like how people used to describe piranha when they'd eat something. That they became mythologized to this point that they would just be able to completely consume somebody really quick. Well, I hope no explorers go missing because you've repeatedly introduced them to human flesh as part of their diet, but I haven't read about any. So what kind of human-eating species were these rats? And what were they doing in a cave if they liked meat that much? Seems like you'd get meat somewhere else. How'd they evolve that way?
These guys watch too many movies.
Well, in Iceman, at the very beginning, Richard says they were Norway rats. Basically, your common sewer rat, also known as the brown rat, the kind that invade Taco Bell and infested at 4 a.m. in the morning whenever the meats got out. But do hordes of brown rats ever gather together and attack and eat people like that, quickly devouring them down to the bone and even crawling off with the bone? Something sketchy about that. If that were true, wouldn't New York City be gone by now? I mean, it'd be kind of a terrifying place. Let's see. Now, the book Iceman quickly jumps ahead to invite its readers to see how dangerous Iceman could be when it describes his first brown piranha cave rat torture, starting on page 5. Roy DeMeo, whose philosophy was no body, no crime, and kill the victim as quickly as possible, and if they have to be tortured, it would be done in Canarsie or Flatlands, and he'd do it himself, sometimes with multiple killers, for some reason has faith in this big Pollock. Also, all his inner crew work for free as a job requirement, but for some reason, Kuklinski claims that he was Roy's secret weapon, whatever that means. Anyway, instead he uses Iceman. And he illogically decides to pay Iceman because Roy doesn't care about money suddenly. So this employer is going to give Richard $10,000 for killing him and $20,000 for the suffering. Who knows how much Roy got, but I'm sure this $20,000 was a substantial amount of it, and that's going to Iceman. Clearly, not only did DeMeo suddenly not like money, he also forgot how to kill himself. Something, as a serial killer who saw his numbers like an athletic record, he was always trying to kill more and more people so he would have killed the most. That doesn't seem to make much sense. He'd want Richard, who he has no reason to think is better at it than himself, go do it. Finally, he forgot he did have more competent killers who could get the job done in New Jersey and have the body vanish at Fountain Avenue or one of the New York City or New Jersey local junkyards where they had incinerators. Instead, Roy just assumes Richard is telling the truth about his brown piranha cave rats and lets him go kidnap the victim, and he does so, this Richard, in broad daylight with a .357 Magnum that would make a lot of noise if the victim decided to resist. Then he drives the victim, Iceman does, 300 miles so he can feed them to his pet rats. They're always eager to see their master. They miss him. And Roy presumed that these pet rats would an ineffective disposal system. He usually tested them, but, pet rats, everybody knows that those things work. The only thing Roy loved more than money was murdering people, which is why he only offered $11,000 to hit a guy named Mikey Muscles. Now that's a detail you can find if you'd go read Capicci's Murder Machine, which is far better than the Iceman book. DeMeo was far more fascinating. That hit will also be described further in my own book, which I'm writing on DeMeo and his crew and the police who helped bring him down. But in this instance, if Iceman was true, the one thing I could think of is maybe this no-named guy contracting the hit offered a lot more money to Roy, but said he would only do it if Roy used a big Pollock who had an army of man-eating rats at his command. That would disqualify Roy or his crew from being able to do the hit and leave Roy with no choice but to pay Richard, probably the only guy to dominate rats since the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Once Richard gets there to Bucks County, he's driven all the way there, hasn't gotten caught yet, He ties the victim up and leaves him alone for 2 days, something that Roy would have killed anybody for, since the victim might escape if you just leave him there. And he films him being eaten by his giant rats, again, and then he takes the tapes and drives this 300 miles back, which is evidence that Roy would not want him carrying around. And then, on top of that, he has a blabbermouth doing it. Richard would someday tell Olafroni, the cop who would arrest him, within a few days after meeting him, that he was a contract killer, and a blabbermouth who bragged constantly. Roy himself, he couldn't stand anybody bragging around him. It would make him pissed. He'd cut you up for it if he really didn't like you. Richard, as I mentioned earlier, just left that tape of him torturing somebody alive. Roy's not going to be happy with that. Richard would have been killed in a day. But I guess if you have an army of superhuman rats, that might intimidate Roy a little bit. Now, for some other incidences in which he did this in Bucks County, and it progressively, the rats get more and more out of control and bigger, or at least there's more of them, and now they're eating the bones even. On page 8, he's left this poor son of a bitch screaming and begging, and he's come back 4 days later, and there's nothing but a skeleton. It's an odd. Same again, page 192, nothing but an odd skeleton. And this time it's only been 2 days. On page 228, he returns, and the rats even took the bones and left nothing but a stain. Yes, at that point, there were even more rats, or they mutated into larger rats in their ravenous flesh-eating stage. Now, later in the book, Sammy the Bull has now hired Richard, because he's basically forgotten how to kill himself, or even rely on competent killers, and he's decided Iceman's going to go drive a few hundred miles away with his victim, which leads to a lot of risk, to feed him to his enormous, thankful pet rats, whom by now must be in the millions. And somehow they still haven't starved to death. They're just sitting in a fucking cave, waiting for Richard to feed them something. Where are these goddamn things going and getting that much meat, if there's that many, that they can strip them down to the bones that quickly? Now, are there even examples of brown rats doing something like this? Richard describes this terrible cave, opening from granite, where deep inside it would go so far back it would become pitch, be able to hear these ravenous rats. So this is the area he claimed he would feed his victims to rats. Rats that were so deadly as to be literally legendary. He dropped meat in front of the caves, and these gnawing and crawling, scampering brown beasts would descend, always famished, to carry away the meat in their horrific horde. The part about rats crawling over and eating hamburger, that's not too unbelievable. That rats, which are omnivores, rushed out in throngs from a cave every time he would go there and put hamburger there, sounds like he was playing a little bit too much Dungeons and Dragons. You see, rats that are that hungry and that many, they wouldn't sit in a cave. Again, they would migrate to more plentiful areas. And, of course, Rich never revealed the location to his den of wicked Mighty Mouse chaos, even though he couldn't shut his fucking mouth about everything else. And that's a red flag, because, the cave's obvious bullshit if he can't say anything about where it's at. So this brings me to my next point. Richard Kranzel is a specialist on Bucks County caves, writes for the National Speleological Cave Society. He's never even heard of this legendary den of horror. And if you don't know what speleological means, which is not easy to pronounce, I struggle all the time, it's the study of caves. He said Durham is the largest Bucks County cave, and like I pointed out earlier, Bucks County is otherwise not known for enormous caves like that. He points out there are a lot of tourists, spelunkers who go there. Nobody's seen any evidence of skeletons. This is not a place, an area, where nobody in the last 50 years would have not noticed a cave that large. Sure, there are some instances of brown rats invading some caves in the world as an invasive species, such as Hawaii, but that was because the caves were near human settlements, the rats were able to follow human waste, and they didn't permanently remain in those caves. They would return to areas with more food, like the human settlements, or towns or cities, and it just created a pattern of migration during certain periods. Now, brown rats are the ultimate scavengers and omnivores more than predators. They started in Southeast Asia over 100,000 years ago and followed humans, especially with the expansion of civilizations, exploration, and conquering. The most of their near domination of the Earth, which they have kind of dominated the Earth at this point, happened in the last 3,000 or 4,000 years. So, even in those instances where you might find some brown rats, some of the time, in some places on the planet, that's not at Bucks County, where they have not been seen. Now, let's see what the evidence is of brown rats devouring people in just a few days, till they were skeletons. Unless Ritchie was a liar, there should be some evidence of prehistoric, piranha-like behavior among basic subway rats. Alright, historically we have rat torture. During the Renaissance, some torturers placed containers with rats over a person's exposed stomach. The human victim was restrained, couldn't do anything about it. The container was heated up, and the rats would desperately try to gnaw their way out of the victim because they had nowhere else to go. There were variants of this practiced by South American dictators during the 20th century. That's useless if that's an example, because if something's suffering or threatened enough, anything can act outside its nature in order to escape pain and fear. Nor were there any records of these rats burrowing through the human torture victim like some kind of drill, with the cartoonish and ravenous effectiveness described in Philip Carlo's Iceman, which is basically fiction. Sorry, you watch too many movies if you believe that. The only other examples I could find were some very sick and impoverished, usually homeless people and drug addicts, who had severe abrasions due to nips from rats, and where a baby died in horrific instance. I don't want to detail, but the rats attacked very vulnerable places. Enough said about that, because I'm trying to keep this show as light as I can for such a dark subject. But in both those cases where the rat infestation was very severe, nothing happened like Richard explained, where they're running off with bones. That's like something out of a dark Disney cartoon, ironically enough. And even if they were cartoonishly that aggressive, take a lot of them to consume all the way down to that. If they're that hungry, what the hell are they doing in a cave where prey is sparse? So there aren't really any examples of people being eaten alive by starving rats. And that's because starving rats don't eat people alive. New York City wouldn't have any people if they did. But none of this matters, because what's most ironic is Bucks County caves don't even have brown rats. Rats in Bucks County Cave are the shy Allegheny wood rat. They're herbivores. They eat nuts and berries. And there aren't very many of them.
Hi, I'm Mario, the Game Commission's North Central Regional Wildlife Diversity Biologist. Today, I want to take you along with me as I go into some remote habitat in search of the state-threatened Allegheny wood rat. Also known as the rock rat, this small rock-dwelling mammal loves a room with a view, living in steep mountainside rock outcrops surrounded by deciduous forest. Fortunately, wood rats leave us little clues alerting us to their presence. Adult females typically occupy a primary den site well hidden deep within the rock. Entrances to nests are often lined with dry leaves and twigs that serve as an alarm system if something approaches. Because this pack rat caches food items for winter, we can search for fungi and herbaceous plants packaged into small bundles tucked away in rock runways and small crevices.
Rich encountered any cave rats there. He spotted that rat, might have thought it was the brown rat, and was inspired by 70s and 80s films about carnivorous rats. That was an era of monster films. If anything, this tells us Rich was a fan of horror and action films, contemporary with the times. He should have been working as a scriptwriter in Hollywood. He would have actually made more money than he ever did as burglar and killer. He had real talent for it. And I'm actually serious about that. I'm not making fun of him. He really did have talent.